Have you ever imagined having the dream of becoming a millionaire, but when you look around, all you see are obstacles, and everything feels so difficult? Have you ever imagined having that dream, but being homeless, without even a place to sleep? That's exactly what happened to today's character. Today, I'm going to share with you the incredible journey of a homeless man who dreamed of becoming a millionaire, and, over time, actually made that dream come true. And the most amazing part, what he did, anyone can do. Yes, even you can start today. So let's follow this story, and you'll be amazed by the incredible journey of a homeless man who, against all odds, became a millionaire in a short period of time. But before we continue, don't forget, if you know you were born to be a millionaire, subscribe to the channel I Am Prosperous, because here you will find the path to start transforming your life and living like a true millionaire. A 5-second message. Are you in debt? Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind. From the streets to the stars. The story of a dreamer. A life forgotten. Michael had nothing. The world spun around him in colors he no longer recognized. Neon lights, rushing cars, hurried feet. Yet he sat still, a silent ghost on the corner of Maple and Fifth, invisible to the masses that passed by. Each morning, he awoke to the bite of the cold and the hard kiss of the concrete against his back. His jacket, once vibrant, was now little more than a second layer of skin, torn, stained, and nearly fused to his frame from months of wear. His sleeping bag was thin as paper, barely shielding him from the cruel winds that whipped through the streets each night. Michael was a man forgotten by time and, perhaps, by fate itself. There was no one looking for him. No voice that cried out in worry when he didn't come home. No memories being made. No birthdays remembered. His existence had shrunk down to basic survival. Find food, find shelter, stay warm. Repeat. The loneliness was a hunger far deeper than the one in his stomach. There were days he would sit with his knees pulled tight to his chest, watching life go by. Mothers laughing with their children, couples sharing coffee, businessmen shouting into phones, all weaving through the city in a rhythm he was no longer part of. Each one passing just inches from him. And yet, he might as well have been a shadow on the wall. Sometimes, Michael wondered if he had died already, if this life was some cruel afterlife where he was forced to watch the world continue without him. The lack of acknowledgement cut deeper than any knife. People didn't look at him with anger or pity. They didn't look at all. In his heart, Michael still carried a fragile ember, a stubborn, flickering hope that maybe, somehow, this wasn't how his story had to end. But most days, the ember felt suffocated by the weight of reality. He had no idea when exactly it had all fallen apart. The descent into homelessness wasn't a dramatic plunge. It was a slow, relentless unraveling. One missed paycheck. One landlord unwilling to wait. One friend too busy to answer the phone. And just like that, the ground disappeared from under him. At first, Michael fought it. He clung to the idea that this was temporary. But weeks turned into months, and hope turned into humiliation. He stopped going to shelters, where the smell of despair and the sound of coughing babies were almost too much to bear. He stopped calling the few numbers he still remembered. He stopped caring. The city taught him new skills: how to spot half-eaten sandwiches in trash bins without drawing attention, how to find the warmest subway vents in winter, how to sleep with one eye open. He learned how to disappear in a crowd, how to become part of the scenery that no one truly sees. And yet, despite everything, a tiny part of Michael still dreamed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hopeful. It wasn't even believable. But somewhere deep inside, beyond the hunger, beyond the cold, beyond the isolation, there was still a whisper. What if there's more? Most days, Michael ignored it. It was easier to believe that he had been forgotten, discarded by life. But in the silent hours of the night, when the streets emptied and only the stars remained, Michael would look up, and for just a moment, he would let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was meant for something greater. That maybe life hadn't forgotten him. Maybe it was just waiting. A 5-second message. Are you in debt? Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind. The Dream That Refused to Die. Even when the world offered Michael nothing but cold nights and colder stares, one thing remained untouched: his dream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't something he dared to share aloud. But deep within him, hidden under layers of pain and survival, the dream flickered stubbornly. He wanted to be a millionaire. It sounded absurd, even to him. Sometimes, as he shivered under a bus stop shelter or scavenged for scraps, he would laugh bitterly at himself. How could a man who didn't know where his next meal was coming from possibly dream of millions? How could someone invisible to the world believe he could ever matter enough to build an empire? And yet, the dream persisted. It refused to be crushed by hunger, by rejection, by the endless chorus of "you can't" that the streets seemed to scream at him every day. It lived in the rare moments when he dared to close his eyes and escape, imagining soft beds, warm meals, handshakes in glass buildings, and a life where he was not merely surviving, but thriving. In the silence of the night, when the city's chaos faded into a distant hum, Michael would let himself believe. He would picture holding crisp bills in his hands, signing checks with his name, walking into rooms where people stood to greet him with respect instead of pity or indifference. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being seen. It was about proving that he was more than the sum of his misfortunes. He dreamed of dignity, of self-worth, of building something that could never be taken from him again. Michael knew better than anyone how ridiculous his dreams seemed. Reality slapped him in the face every morning. Reality told him he wasn't special, that dreams were luxuries reserved for those who already had something: a roof, a network, a family, a second chance. And yet, each morning, alongside the aches and the gnawing hunger, he still carried it with him, invisible but unbroken. There were days when despair wrapped around him like a heavy fog. Days when it seemed easier to let go, to finally accept that dreaming was for other people, not for him. But every time he came close to surrendering, something, a spark he couldn't explain, kept him from letting the dream die. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was something older, deeper, a belief, no matter how battered, that life could still change. That maybe the man with nothing could one day have everything. In the alleys and sidewalks where Michael wandered, he met others who had given up. Faces hollowed out by hopelessness, eyes dulled by endless defeat. He saw what it looked like when someone let their dream die, and it terrified him. He promised himself, silently, desperately, that he would not become one of them. He would not let the streets erase who he wanted to be. No matter how impossible it seemed, no matter how long it took, no matter how much he had to suffer, he would hold on to his dream. Because without it, Michael knew, he would truly have nothing. The dream wasn't just about becoming a millionaire. It was about survival of the spirit. It was the only thing separating him from the abyss. And as long as he had that dream, however small, however hidden, he was still alive. Nights of tears and prayers. When the city finally slept and the streets emptied into silence, Michael would find a corner to call his own. There, under the vast, uncaring sky, he surrendered to the only thing he still possessed: his voice in prayer. Each night, he would close his eyes, ignoring the sting of the cold that gnawed at his skin. He whispered into the darkness, words that no one heard, words that sometimes he barely believed himself. One day, one day. The same promise, the same fragile vow, repeated over and over like a broken song. Tears would fall, hot and unbidden, carving silent paths down his weathered face. There was no shame in those tears anymore. No pride left to defend. Only raw, aching need. He wasn't praying for riches or fame. Not at first. He prayed for strength. For another sunrise. For a little more courage to face another day in a world that pretended he didn't exist. The stars above seemed indifferent, glittering coldly in the black velvet sky. Sometimes, he would stare at them so long that the ache in his heart became a physical pain. Were they watching him? Did anything in this vast, endless universe care if he lived or died? Michael's prayers weren't polished or poetic. They were jagged, desperate, bleeding out of him in half-formed sentences and choked whispers. "Help me," he would beg. "Don't let me disappear. Not like this." Some nights, anger would bubble up between his whispered prayers. He would curse the heavens, demanding answers. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? But even in his rage, he never stopped praying. Even when the only response was the lonely howl of the wind through the alleyways, he kept talking to the sky, to the stars, to anything that might be listening. Because deep down, beneath the hunger, beneath the despair, Michael believed that if he stopped speaking his hope into existence, it would die completely. And if that hope died, so would he. The nights were the hardest. The world's noise faded, and with it went the distractions that numbed the pain during the day. There was no escaping the loneliness at night. No pretending he was anything but a man the world had left behind. And yet, night after night, Michael made the choice to believe, if only for a moment. He chose to believe that his words were seeds planted in the darkness, waiting for a season of growth that he could not yet see. He chose to believe that every tear shed under the stars was seen, counted, remembered. He had nothing to offer but his broken heart and stubborn spirit, but he gave them fully, night after night, in whispered promises to the unseen forces he prayed were real. One day, he would whisper again, the words trembling on his lips. One day it will be different. And somehow, that simple phrase, repeated countless times into the empty night, became a lifeline. A fragile rope pulling him forward, one painful inch at a time. No matter how many nights he cried himself to sleep, no matter how frozen his hands became, no matter how many times hope felt like a cruel joke, he refused to stop. The streets took everything from him, his comfort, his dignity, his safety, but they never stole his voice. And in those darkest hours, when the world seemed to have forgotten his very name, Michael used that voice to carve out a space where dreams could still breathe. Alone under the stars, soaked in tears and wrapped in the merciless grip of winter winds, Michael fought his battles the only way he could. With prayer. With stubborn, reckless belief. With a hope so fierce that not even the coldest nights could kill it. And though the city remained silent, and the stars offered no answers, deep inside, something unseen was beginning to shift. Something was listening. The stranger's words. It was a night like any other. Cold, lonely, unforgiving. Michael sat curled against a brick wall, the rough surface pressing into his back as he tried to find a sliver of warmth against the biting air. He had lost track of how many nights he'd survived like this, how many times he had prayed under the indifferent stars, how many days had bled into one another without change. Then, out of the shadows, came a sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. An old man approached, his figure barely illuminated by a flickering streetlight. He wore a heavy coat, frayed at the edges, and his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 storms. Without asking permission, he lowered himself to the ground beside Michael, groaning softly with the effort. For a long moment, they sat together in silence, two forgotten souls sharing the same brutal night. Then the old man spoke, his voice low and worn, yet strangely steady. "Your life," he said, "is just a reflection of your thoughts. Change your thoughts, and your life will follow." Michael blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that someone had spoken to him like he was still a human being, not just part of the city's debris. Yet the words made no sense. He glanced at his tattered clothes, at his bleeding knuckles, at his empty pockets. What thoughts could possibly change this? "Change my thoughts," he muttered bitterly. "I don't even have anything left to change." The old man only smiled, a tired, knowing smile, as if he could see through Michael's anger, straight into the hollow ache beneath. No explanations were given. No further wisdom was offered. After a few minutes, the stranger stood, brushed the dirt from his coat, and disappeared into the night, leaving Michael alone with a phrase he couldn't understand and yet couldn't forget. The words gnawed at him. They echoed louder than the city's sirens, louder than the hunger twisting his stomach. "Your life is just a reflection of your thoughts." But how could thoughts matter when reality was so brutal? How could mere ideas put food in an empty belly, or shelter a man from the freezing rain? Michael wrestled with it, night after night. The idea was too strange, too simple, too impossible. He had spent so long believing he was trapped, believing the streets owned him now. Could it really be as simple as thinking differently? He remembered times, long ago, when he had believed he was destined for more. Before life had beaten those beliefs out of him. Before the streets had taught him that hope was dangerous and dreams were for other people. Was it possible that he had been wrong? That somewhere inside the ruin he had become, there was still a force, a choice, capable of changing his course? The thought terrified him even more than failure. Because if it was true, it meant he wasn't just a victim. It meant he had some power left, however small.
Michael lay awake under the skeletal arms of winter trees, replaying the old man's words again and again.
Not as a comfort, not as a guarantee, but as a question, a crack in the walls of despair he had built around himself. If his thoughts truly shaped his world, then what had he been creating all these years? Misery, hopelessness, resentment. Without realizing it, he had been feeding the life he hated. Michael didn't understand the full meaning yet. He didn't know how to change. But for the first time in a long time, a tiny possibility stirred within him. Maybe he wasn't as powerless as he had believed. Maybe the true prison wasn't the streets. Maybe it was his mind. And maybe, just maybe, he held the key, planting the first seed. The morning after meeting the old man, Michael sat hunched against the familiar wall, his body shivering under layers of threadbare clothing. The city moved past him in its usual blur of hurried footsteps and indifferent stares. But something inside him felt different.
The old man's words echoed in his mind, refusing to be ignored.
Your life is just a reflection of your thoughts. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Michael didn't immediately sink into the heavy fog of self-pity that usually clouded his mornings.
Instead, an unfamiliar idea began to form. A fragile, trembling thought, barely strong enough to stand on its own.
What if he wasn't meant to live and die forgotten on these streets? What if, just maybe, he was still capable of becoming more? Clutching his empty cup with frozen fingers, Michael closed his eyes against the sharp winter sun and allowed himself to imagine something completely foreign. Himself, transformed. He pictured a version of himself he hadn't seen in years, or perhaps never truly seen. In his mind's eye, he wasn't a ghost on the sidewalk anymore. He was standing tall, dressed in a crisp, tailored suit, the kind that only powerful men wore. His hair was neatly styled. His shoes shined. People listened when he spoke. They respected him. He imagined himself inside a gleaming restaurant, its chandeliers casting golden light over polished tables. He wasn't sitting at the edge of society, begging for scraps. He was at the center of it all, giving orders, leading a team, shaking hands with important people, making decisions that mattered. For a few minutes, Michael forgot about the ache in his stomach. He forgot about the biting wind. He forgot about the dozens of strangers who refused to meet his gaze as they hurried past. He was somewhere else entirely, inside a future only he could see. The vision was clumsy at first, blurry and unbelievable. Part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Another part, a deeper part, clung to it fiercely. Maybe this was what the old man meant. Maybe the first step wasn't about changing the world around him. It was about changing the picture he carried inside his mind. Every day after that, before the hunger overwhelmed him, before the despair could creep back in, Michael forced himself to return to that mental image. He watered it with his imagination, like a gardener tending a tiny, stubborn seed. When the cold was unbearable, he pictured himself sitting by a warm fire in his own home. When hunger gnawed at his insides, he imagined tasting the finest meals prepared in a kitchen he owned. When loneliness whispered that he was invisible, he envisioned shaking hands with smiling customers, hearing his name spoken with admiration. At first, the exercise felt hollow, almost painful. Reality screamed louder than dreams. But Michael pressed on. He realized something powerful. Even if he couldn't change his surroundings yet, no one could stop him from changing what he chose to see inside himself. It was the smallest rebellion imaginable. A single man, broken and cold, daring to believe in a life better than the one he had been given. No applause greeted his efforts. No miracles descended from the sky. There were no immediate rewards. Only the quiet, invisible work of reshaping his inner world, thought by thought, image by image. Each time he imagined himself successful, confident, respected, it became a little easier. The details sharpened. The emotions felt a little more real. Michael didn't know if the vision would ever materialize into anything more than fantasy. But something inside him insisted on nurturing it anyway. Because deep down, He sensed a truth he had never considered before. Reality wasn't fixed. It was malleable. It could be bent. If only he could first bend his mind to see beyond what his eyes showed him.
The first seed was planted, not in soil, but in spirit. And though it was invisible to the world, though it was fragile and easily dismissed, Michael knew it was the beginning of something no winter could freeze, no hunger could erase, no rejection could destroy.
In the quietest way imaginable, a revolution had begun. Battles in the mind. No one could see it, but inside Michael raged the fiercest war he had ever faced.
It wasn't a battle fought with fists or weapons.
It wasn't a struggle against other men or the cruel streets that stretched endlessly before him.
It was a silent, invisible war, fought within the narrow space between his own ears. A battlefield of thoughts, beliefs, and memories. Every morning, as the first harsh light of dawn pried open his tired eyes, the enemy attacked. The voices came like a flood, relentless and cruel.
You are nobody. You will always be nothing. You're a fool for believing anything could change. You're wasting your time.
The words weren't spoken aloud, yet they echoed louder than any noise around him.
They had the weight of every failure he had ever experienced, the bite of every humiliation he had endured. They felt real, familiar, almost comfortable, in their own twisted way. Michael realized that his greatest opponent was not hunger or cold. It was not poverty or abandonment. It was his own mind, poisoned by years of defeat and disappointment. But he refused to surrender. Each time a dark thought surfaced, clawing at the fragile hope he was trying to build, Michael fought back. He counterattacked with the vision he had planted, that vivid image of himself strong, successful, respected. He imagined standing tall in the center of a restaurant filled with laughter and light. He heard his own voice, confident and sure, giving directions to a team who believed in him. It wasn't easy. Most days, it felt like trying to hold back a tidal wave with bare hands. For every moment he spent visualizing a better future, his mind hurled back doubts twice as powerful. You're wasting your energy. You'll die out here just like everyone else. Dreams are for other people, not you. Michael learned that changing the mind was not a single act. It was a constant battle, a daily commitment to refuse the lies that had lived inside him for so long. There were moments he nearly gave in. Moments when the icy winds of reality battered him so hard that the dream seemed like a cruel joke. Moments when he sat with his head in his hands, tears burning his eyes, wondering if it was better to simply stop fighting altogether. But even then, even when the darkness seemed overwhelming, Michael found a way to drag himself back into the fight. He didn't know it then, but every small victory mattered. Every time he rejected a thought that said he was worthless, he weakened the power of that old voice. Every time he insisted on seeing himself as successful, even for a few seconds, he made the dream just a little stronger. It was brutal work. It was exhausting. It demanded more strength than he ever thought he had. But somewhere deep inside, Michael understood. If he couldn't win the war in his mind, he would never win it anywhere else. And so, day after day, he battled. Not with grand speeches or heroic moments, but with stubbornness. With quiet acts of defiance against the despair that tried to claim him. Each positive vision was a sword against the darkness. Each refusal to accept failure was a shield against fear. Nobody else could see the scars of this fight. Nobody cheered when he won small victories. Nobody knew the price he paid just to keep believing in something better. But Michael knew. And for now, that was enough. Because somewhere deep in the trenches of his own mind, something incredible was happening. He was becoming stronger. Not in body, but in spirit. Not in possessions, but in belief. And he was starting to realize that belief, pure, stubborn, defiant belief, might just be the most powerful weapon he would ever wield. Tiny miracles. Time moved slowly for Michael, each day blending into the next under the endless sky. The cold concrete remained his bed, the worn jacket still his shield against the biting winds. But something subtle had shifted, something invisible to the naked eye, something powerful. It began with a single moment. One evening, as Michael sat hunched on a cracked sidewalk, cradling an empty cup in his trembling hands, a man in a business suit paused in front of him. Instead of the usual hurried glance or awkward avoidance, the man knelt down, smiled warmly, and handed Michael a hot meal, neatly packed in a paper bag. There were no condescending words, no pity, just kindness, Pure, simple, unfiltered. Michael could hardly believe it. His hands shook as he opened the bag, the rich scent of food filling his senses like a dream. Tears welled up in his eyes as he ate, savoring each bite, not just for the nourishment but for the feeling that, for once, he mattered. He clutched the bag against his chest long after the food was gone, whispering a thank you into the night air, not just to the stranger, but to whatever unseen force had stirred the universe in his favor. And that was only the beginning. Days later, while resting near the back entrance of a small diner, he overheard the manager grumbling about needing someone to wash dishes after a kitchen worker had quit unexpectedly. Summoning courage he didn't know he had, Michael stood up and offered his help. The manager, skeptical at first, glanced at Michael's ragged clothes and unshaven face. But something about the determination in his eyes made the man hesitate. After a moment of silence heavy with uncertainty, the manager nodded once, sharply. "One night. Trial basis. You mess up, you're gone." Michael nodded eagerly, promising with his heart what he couldn't say in words. The job was simple yet grueling, endless piles of greasy plates, heavy pots, sticky silverware. The hot water stung his cracked hands. The strong soap burned his cuts. Every joint ached from standing for hours. Still, he worked harder than he ever had, treating each plate like a stepping stone toward the future he refused to give up on. When his shift ended at midnight, exhausted beyond measure, the manager handed him a wrinkled $20 bill. Michael held it in his hands for a long moment, staring at it as if it were made of gold. It wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that the universe was listening. Proof that he was not invisible anymore. Tiny miracles. Small, almost imperceptible changes began to weave themselves into his daily existence. One morning, a waitress from the diner noticed him sleeping behind the building and brought him a hot cup of coffee without being asked. A construction worker tossed him a pair of old work boots, worn but sturdy, saying only, "You look like you could use these." At the public library, where he sometimes sought shelter from the weather, a kind librarian allowed him to sit and read without harassment. She even pointed him toward books about business, entrepreneurship, and personal development, her quiet encouragement lighting a new spark within him. Each of these moments, though small on the surface, felt monumental to Michael. They were signs, affirmations that his efforts to change his internal world were beginning to ripple outward. The more he focused on gratitude, the more opportunities seemed to materialize. When he cleaned dishes, he didn't grumble or resent the work. Instead, he pictured himself polishing fine silverware in an upscale restaurant he owned. When he picked up garbage in the alleyway behind the diner, he imagined sweeping the floors of his future establishment, proud of the empire he would one day build. The victories were tiny, almost laughably small compared to the grand dream that burned inside him. But Michael understood something crucial. Momentum starts with inches, not miles. Each small miracle was a seed planted in the fertile soil of his renewed mind. Each act of kindness watered the belief that something extraordinary was growing inside him. There were no trumpets sounding, no headlines announcing his progress. There were only quiet whispers of hope, gentle nudges from the universe, tiny cracks in the walls of limitation that had once imprisoned him. As the weeks slipped by, the new habits he had cultivated in his thinking began to solidify. His mind, once a battleground of despair, was becoming a garden of quiet determination. He realized that miracles were not always grand explosions of fate. Sometimes, they were small, almost invisible shifts. A smile from a stranger, a hand extended without expectation, a door left ajar when all others had been slammed shut. Michael learned to treasure these small signs. He celebrated every hot meal, every earned dollar, every hour spent indoors instead of out in the cold. Each moment was a building block for the future he was constructing, piece by fragile piece. Most importantly, he realized that he was not powerless. He was a co-creator of his destiny, partnering with a universe that had been waiting, patiently, silently, for him to believe in his own worth. The miracles were tiny, yes, but together, they formed a staircase, one that Michael was determined to climb, no matter how slow, no matter how steep. Step by step, he was moving forward, and deep in his heart, he knew, if such small miracles were possible now, then the future he dreamed of, the life of abundance, dignity, and purpose, was not just a fantasy. It was inevitable. All he had to do was keep walking, building the dream. Michael's hands, once numb from cold, now moved with relentless purpose. He scrubbed, wiped, polished, not merely to clean, but to carve out a future invisible to those around him. At first, his tasks were basic. Stacking dirty plates, scraping leftover food into bins, scrubbing grimy pans under steaming water until his fingertips wrinkled and burned. Most workers grumbled through such chores, treating them as punishment or temporary burdens. Not Michael. To him, each plate represented a customer, every clean table, a future client. Each spotless fork was a small testament to the standards he would one day demand in his own establishment. His mind, sharper now than ever, refused to allow him to drift into frustration or fatigue. Every shift was an education. While dishwashing, he observed the flow of the kitchen, noting how orders moved from chef to server, how timing, coordination, and efficiency kept everything alive. He paid attention to the way the manager scheduled shifts, handled inventory, responded to complaints. Nothing escaped his watchful gaze. Then, one afternoon, the diner's head waiter quit mid-shift after an argument with the manager. The restaurant scrambled. Tables filled up, service slowed, tensions rose. Michael saw his chance. Without waiting for permission, he put down his dish rag, wiped his hands on his apron, and approached a family waiting impatiently at the door. Smiling warmly, he grabbed menus, led them to a booth, poured water into their glasses, and assured them someone would be with them shortly. Someone noticed. The manager, red-faced and frazzled, waved him over. "You know how to take orders?" Michael nodded. He had watched enough. "Fine. Don't screw it up." From that night, Michael wasn't just the dishwasher anymore. He started waiting tables, learning a new rhythm. Faster, more public, more pressured. His tips were small, but each dollar meant something. He saved obsessively, stuffing bills into an envelope hidden deep in his belongings. When he wasn't working, he was studying. He haunted the public library like a ghost, hungrily devouring every book he could find on business, leadership, customer service, and restaurant management. Authors like Dale Carnegie, Robert Kiyosaki, and Stephen Covey became his silent mentors. He scribbled notes in old spiral notebooks, highlighting sentences that resonated like church bells inside him. People buy experiences, not just products. Leadership is service, not position. Wealth begins in the mind long before it appears in the bank. Every sentence fueled his determination. At the diner, Michael's work ethic became legendary. Customers requested him by name. Other employees, some with years more experience, found themselves looking to him for advice on difficult days. He remembered their birthdays, offered encouragement during slow shifts, covered extra tables without complaint. He understood instinctively that success wasn't built through ambition alone, but through connection, trust, and genuine care for others. Gradually, responsibilities shifted. The manager began asking him to oversee shifts when he wasn't around. Michael managed inventory, double-checked orders, scheduled staff, handled complaints from irate customers, all while continuing his personal study at night. He made mistakes, of course. Forgotten orders, miscommunicated specials, mismanaged break schedules. Each error stung. But rather than wallow in embarrassment, he dissected every failure with brutal honesty, learning, adjusting, improving. Failure wasn't an end. It was an instruction. Piece by piece, day by day, Michael was no longer merely surviving. He was constructing something invisible but real, a vision solid enough to hold under the weight of reality. His dream had shape now. He could see the restaurant he would one day own. Not just the marble countertops, not just the polished floors or linen napkins, but the feeling he wanted customers to experience. A sense of welcome, of belonging, of joy. In his mind, he named it already. Practiced saying it aloud when no one was listening. He imagined his logo, his menu, the layout of the tables, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. Some nights, he sat in the tiny staff locker room after everyone else had gone home, notebook in hand, sketching floor plans, brainstorming themes, listing suppliers. It didn't matter that his bank account was meager, that his clothes were secondhand, or that his past was full of empty nights under streetlights. Michael understood now that wealth wasn't something that happened to people. It was something they built, thought by thought, choice by choice, hour by hour. He was laying bricks in a foundation few could see. His life was still modest. Cramped living quarters above the diner, long hours, aching feet. But the difference between Michael and almost everyone around him was invisible, hidden deep within. He wasn't working for tips. He wasn't working for minimum wage. He was working for a future he had already seen in his mind so clearly, so vividly, that to him, it already existed. Reality was just catching up. While others spent their free time scrolling through their phones or complaining about long shifts, Michael sharpened himself. He studied market trends, wrote mock business plans, memorized customer service techniques. He learned to listen more than he spoke. He observed patterns, what made customers return, what small gestures turned a meal into a memory. No detail escaped his focus. He practiced gratitude for the smallest blessings, a kind review left by a customer, a bonus shift offered at the last minute, a discount on second-hand dress shirts that helped him look more professional. Each small improvement layered onto the last, compounding like interest in a hidden bank account.
Michael knew that dreaming wasn't enough.
Work had to meet the dream. Persistence had to anchor the vision. Faith had to dance with effort. Building his dream wasn't glamorous. It was sweat and sleepless nights. It was swallowing pride, shouldering responsibility, pushing through exhaustion when every muscle screamed for rest. But somewhere deep inside him, stronger than fear, louder than doubt, was a voice he had trained himself to hear. Keep going. Keep building. It's already yours. And so he did.
Brick by invisible brick, shift after thankless shift, Michael was erecting a future few could imagine. Not yet visible to the world, but alive, fierce, and waiting just around the bend. A 5-second message. Are you in debt?
Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind. The Great Leap. 5 years. 60 months. Thousands of days spent grinding, saving, sacrificing, and dreaming. That's how long it took before Michael finally stood in front of the dusty, abandoned storefront that would become his first restaurant. It was far from perfect. Cracked windows, peeling paint, sagging awning. But when Michael looked at it, he didn't see decay. He saw possibility. Securing the lease wasn't simple. Michael had to convince skeptical landlords, navigate endless paperwork, and wrestle with a mountain of self-doubt that sometimes crept in late at night. The money he had scraped together over the years, tips carefully hoarded, small bonuses, cash earned from side hustles like cleaning offices at night, barely covered the deposit and the first few months' rent. He knew he was stepping off a cliff, hoping wings would appear before he hit the ground. Fear was a constant companion. There were nights when he sat alone inside the gutted space, listening to the sound of passing cars, questioning whether he had lost his mind. No investors, no partners, just a dream so bright it sometimes hurt to look directly at it.
Renovations began with bare hands and borrowed tools.
Friends from the diner lent him old paintbrushes. A retired carpenter from the neighborhood taught him how to repair broken cabinets. Michael bartered where he could, offering free meals in the future in exchange for help today. He slept on a threadbare mattress in the back room, his savings too fragile to allow luxuries like a separate apartment. Cold showers, microwave dinners, and 18-hour days became his norm. He handled everything: cleaning, wiring, plumbing, licensing, sourcing suppliers. Each task was a mountain he climbed with sheer determination. When money ran out, and it often did, Michael didn't despair. He adapted. He learned about second-hand restaurant equipment auctions, finding ovens and fridges discarded by larger businesses but still humming with potential. He scavenged furniture, sanding and repainting tables others had thrown away. Handmade menus were printed at a local copy shop, each laminated by hand late at night. Naming the restaurant was an act of love. He chose a name that spoke of hope, of new beginnings, a tribute to the man he had once been, sitting invisible on freezing sidewalks. Opening day approached faster than he thought possible. Flyers were distributed by hand on street corners. Social media pages, built late at night with free online tools, began to attract a trickle of curiosity. But fear never disappeared. The night before opening, Michael sat on the front step, staring up at the stars he had prayed under years ago. Doubt gnawed at him. Would anyone show up? Had he built all of this only to fail?
The morning of the grand opening arrived with a burst of sunlight and a racing heart. Michael donned the sharpest suit he could afford. A modest, well-fitted jacket bought secondhand but worn with a king's pride. The first customers were few, a mother and her son, an elderly couple, a pair of curious teenagers. Michael greeted them personally, took their orders, served their food, refilled their drinks. He moved between tables with a heart pounding not with anxiety, but gratitude. Every plate he placed before a customer, every smile he received, every whispered "thank you" was a triumph. It wasn't just about selling meals. It was proof, tangible proof, that he had once closed his eyes on a concrete sidewalk and thought this life into existence. Business was slow at first. Bills piled up faster than the cash register filled. Some days the restaurant was half empty, and doubt tried to sink its claws into his mind again. But Michael had learned long ago that persistence was stronger than fear. He adjusted. He listened to customer feedback, refined his menu, tweaked the decor, adapted his hours to better fit the neighborhood's needs. He built relationships with local suppliers, forming partnerships that kept costs manageable. He made every person who walked through his door feel like a guest of honor. He remembered their favorite meals. He celebrated their birthdays with a complimentary slice of pie. He sent handwritten thank you notes to regulars. Word spread. What started as a trickle became a steady stream. Families returned. Locals recommended his place to friends. Soon, the once-forgotten little restaurant buzzed with laughter, conversation, and clinking glasses. Michael refused to let success soften him. He remained the first to arrive each morning, the last to leave at night. He mopped floors, washed dishes, checked inventory, and balanced accounts. Every smile, every satisfied customer, every new face walking through the door reinforced a powerful truth. Michael had dreamed this world into existence. With no money, no connections, no handouts. Just belief. And action. And relentless, daily, stubborn faith. Debt still loomed overhead like a thundercloud, and exhaustion was his constant shadow. There were weeks when unexpected repairs or supplier delays almost crushed him financially. But Michael understood something most people never learn. The path to dreams isn't a straight line. It's a twisting, grueling, beautiful journey paved with persistence and painted by vision. His walls weren't adorned with fancy diplomas or awards. They were filled with framed pictures of smiling customers, handwritten notes from first-time diners who had become loyal patrons, and quotes that had fueled him through the darkest nights. Your life is a reflection of your thoughts. The old man's words had proven true beyond anything Michael could have imagined. The great leap he had taken, from scrubbing dishes to owning a thriving restaurant, wasn't just a leap of faith. It was a leap into a new identity. A rebirth crafted from invisible forces few could understand, but anyone could wield if they dared. And as he stood behind the counter one evening, watching his restaurant glow with life, Michael realized something deeper. The dream wasn't just about money. It was about creation. About proving, once and for all, that reality bends to the hands of those who dare to believe fiercely enough. And in that realization he smiled. Not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. The secret revealed. Michael stood quietly in the center of his bustling restaurant, the low hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the rich aromas of fresh dishes swirling around him like music composed for this very moment. But inside, he was somewhere else entirely. He wasn't thinking about profit margins, daily specials, or next month's rent. He was thinking about something much deeper, something that had taken him years to fully understand. The greatest treasure he had discovered wasn't tangible. It wasn't the bricks of the building, the money in the register, or even the steady flow of satisfied customers. It was something invisible, yet infinitely powerful. It was himself. The secret was never outside, not in lottery tickets, lucky breaks, or sudden windfalls. It had lived within him all along, dormant like a seed beneath frozen soil, waiting for him to wake it up. Michael realized that every thought he had once dared to believe, every tiny mental image he had clung to while lying under the icy stars, had built this reality around him, one invisible brick at a time. His world had not changed by chance. His world had changed because he changed his mind. He thought back to the countless nights he had sat against the cold walls of the city, his body weak, his hope flickering like a dying candle. In those moments, he had no material proof that his life could ever be different. Yet something inside him had whispered, over and over, "Imagine it anyway." That tiny act,
Imagining despite evidence, believing despite proof, had been the real magic. Michael understood now. You do not wait for success to believe you are successful. You believe first, and belief rearranges reality.
He thought about all the times he had wrestled negative voices inside his head, the inner demons that screamed he was worthless, invisible, doomed. And he remembered how he had fought them, one thought at a time, like a warrior who refused to surrender, no matter how bloody the battle became. Each time he visualized himself thriving, each time he dared to feel gratitude for a future he could not yet see, he planted another seed. And slowly, painstakingly, those seeds had taken root. Now they were blooming all around him. The waiters moving confidently between tables. The cheerful chatter of loyal customers. The scent of freshly baked bread wafting from the kitchen. The warm light spilling from every window onto the once-forgotten street. He had imagined it first, before any of it existed. Before anyone else believed in him. Before there was the faintest hint that things could ever be different. The universe, Michael realized, is like a mirror. It does not show you what you want. It shows you what you believe. When he had believed he was invisible, unworthy, broken, the world had reflected that. But when he had dared to believe he was capable, valuable, destined for greatness, reality had bent to meet him there. He had discovered that imagination is not a child's toy. It is a builder's blueprint. Thoughts are not idle daydreams. They are seeds of destiny. He realized now that every great achievement in history, every towering skyscraper, revolutionary invention, moving song, or life-changing business had begun the same way. In someone's mind. Every creation had first existed invisibly, in belief, before materializing into form. Michael smiled, recognizing that he had tapped into the same infinite force that had built empires, cured diseases, painted masterpieces, and sent rockets into the stars. Belief, imagination, focus. These were the raw materials of the universe. These were the treasures he had uncovered not by searching outwardly, but by digging inwardly. He knew many would never understand. Some would look at his restaurant and say he was lucky. Some would think he had caught a fortunate break. They would never see the invisible wars he fought in silence. The prayers whispered into darkness. The stubborn visions held tight when reality offered no evidence. The countless rejections, the private tears, the endless tiny decisions to keep moving forward. Michael had lived the secret. He had breathed it, bled for it, cried for it, and now he was living proof of its power. He understood that anyone, anywhere, could do the same. You didn't need money to start. You didn't need connections, status, or even a roof over your head. You needed one thing: the ability to imagine something better, and the courage to believe it into existence. He realized that thoughts, when repeated with emotion and unwavering focus, solidify into reality as surely as bricks form a wall. This truth was simple, yet profound. What you believe, you become. What you imagine, you create. What you hold in your mind long enough will eventually be held in your hands. Michael's journey, from forgotten street corner to the vibrant heart of his own thriving business, was not just a story about survival. It was a story about creation. He hadn't just survived, he had built a new world around himself, brick by mental brick, until it stood solid beneath his feet. And he knew that if he could do it, penniless, friendless, invisible, then anyone willing to believe fiercely enough could do it too. As the night grew deeper and the last customers drifted out, Michael turned off the lights, locking the door behind him. He walked down the street he once slept on, now bathed in the soft glow of his restaurant sign, and he smiled. He carried with him the greatest riches a man could possess. Not the cash in the bank, not the success he had achieved, but the unshakable knowledge that he was, and always had been, the master of his own destiny. Thoughts become things. Dreams shape reality. Belief builds worlds. Michael had proven it. And now, he was ready to dream even bigger. A 5-second message. Are you in debt? Want to know how to always have money? After watching this video, click the first link below, in the description or the pinned comment. Discover the Live Always with Money method. Find out the 10 steps that are changing lives. Link in the description and pinned comment. And for you, the one who knows you were born to be a millionaire, to be rich, I invite you to discover how to get rich through the power of thought. Access the method in the description. Golden Mindset, 30 Steps to Wealth Through the Power of the Mind.